"You're not half the woman Dad's new wife is," my son and his wife said at dinner. I never thought the moment that broke my heart would happen over a plate of roast chicken. You expect betrayals to be loud, dramatic things like in the movies. But in real life, they are quiet. They happen in the spaces between fork bites and polite laughter. They happen in the home you helped build, spoken by the child you raised. It was a humid Tuesday evening in Tampa. I was sitting at the dining table in my son Russell's house. The air conditioning was humming, battling the Florida heat, but it felt suffocating inside. I looked around the room. I knew every corner of this house. I knew the cost of the crown molding Russell was so proud of. I knew how much the new hardwood floors had set the budget back last year. I knew these things because I was the one who made sure the bills got paid. Not that anyone at this table knew that. To them, I was just Dawn. Quiet, reliable, invisible Dawn. Across from me sat Cheryl, my ex-husband's new wife. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, and she had a way of taking up all the air in the room. She was talking about their recent trip to Italy, waving her hands around, so her gold bracelets jingled. "Tom just insisted we upgrade to the villa," Cheryl was saying, laughing lightly. I told him it was too much, but you know your father, Russell. He loves to spoil the people he loves. Russell was leaning forward, his eyes wide, soaking it all in. He looked like a little boy again, desperate for approval. "That sounds amazing, Cheryl. Dad's always been generous. He really knows how to live." I took a sip of my iced tea to wash down the bitterness. Tom wasn't generous. Tom was reckless. He was a man who bought champagne on a beer budget and left others to clean up the hangover. But I had spent 30 years cleaning up those hangovers quietly, so my son wouldn't have to see his father's mess. I looked at my daughter-in-law, Stacy. She was pushing her green beans around her plate, looking down. She knew better. She knew things were tight for them, even if Russell refused to admit it. "You should really come visit us at the lake house next summer," Cheryl continued, beaming at Russell. "I'm thinking of redoing the guest suite. Maybe something modern. What do you think, Dawn? You like simple things, don't you?" The shade was subtle, but it hit its mark. She was calling me plain, boring, cheap. "I think simple is often better," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Less to worry about." Russell chuckled, but it wasn't a nice sound. "Mom's always been cautious. Dad's the visionary. That's why he's where he is." And he trailed off, but the end of the sentence hung in the air, "and that's why you are where you are." I felt a tightening in my chest. I had worked at a retirement planning firm for 25 years. I handled millions of dollars in assets. I was the one who taught Russell how to balance a checkbook, a skill he seemed to have forgotten the moment he wanted to impress his father. I wasn't cautious because I was scared. I was cautious because someone had to be the safety net for this family. "Well," Cheryl said, pouring herself more wine, "it takes a certain kind of strength to support a man like Tom. He needs a partner who can keep up with him, someone who matches his energy. Not everyone is cut out for that high-octane lifestyle." She smiled at me. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who thought they had won a contest I didn't even know I was entering. "Mom did her best," Russell said. I froze. That sounded like a defense, but his tone was dismissive. He wasn't defending me. He was apologizing for me. Russell continued, looking at Cheryl with admiration. "Dad is a lot to handle. He needs someone dynamic. Mom, you've always been more of a background player. You know, you keep the lights on, but Cheryl, she's the spotlight." The room went quiet. Even Stacy stopped moving her fork. The grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to tick louder. I kept the lights on. I repeated slowly, "That's an interesting way to put it, Russell." He waved his hand, dismissing my tone. He was drinking the wine Cheryl had brought, drunk on the illusion of his father's success. Don't take it personal, Mom. I'm just being honest. Dad needs a woman who reflects his status. No offense, but you're just not half the woman Dad's new wife is. The words landed on the table like a dead weight. You're just not half the woman Dad's new wife is. Stacy gasped softly. Russell. Cheryl didn't look embarrassed. She looked down at her wine glass, hiding a smirk. She loved this. She loved seeing the old model discarded for the new upgrade. My heart hammered against my ribs. My first instinct was to scream. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to scream. Who do you think paid for this table? Who do you think paid for the roof over your head for the last 2 years while your visionary father bounced checks across 3 counties? The anger rose up in my throat, hot and acidic. I wanted to drag out my phone, log into the bank app, and shove the transaction history in his face. I wanted to show him the family trust transfers that kept his mortgage current every month. I wanted to shatter his little world right then and there. But then I looked at him. I looked at my son, a grown man who was so blinded by glitter he couldn't see the gold. If I screamed now, I would just be the crazy ex-wife. I would be the bitter, jealous woman making a scene. I would prove his point. He thought I was weak. He thought I was a background player. A strange calm washed over me. It was cold and sharp. If I was a background player, then maybe it was time for the background to disappear. Let's see how the play goes without the stage. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my drink. I just stared at him. I held his gaze until he started to shift uncomfortably in his chair. The smirk faded from Cheryl's face as the silence stretched out, longer and heavier than they expected. I let the silence do the work. I let his own words hang there, vibrating in the air. Then I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who is closing a book they never really liked reading anyway. You're right, I said softly. My voice was steady. You are absolutely right, Russell. Russell blinked, confused. He had braced himself for a fight or tears. He didn't know what to do with agreement. I didn't mean to be harsh, Mom. Just reality. No, I appreciate the honesty, I said. I placed my napkin neatly on the table, lining up the edges with the placemat. I've been trying too hard to hold onto a role that doesn't fit me anymore. If Cheryl is the woman who matches your father's status, then she is the one who should be handling the responsibilities that come with it. Cheryl frowned, sensing a shift she didn't understand. What do you mean? I stood up. I smoothed down my skirt. I picked up my purse. I said, looking directly at my son, I should step back and let Cheryl handle things. It's only fair. Mom, you haven't finished dinner, Stacy said, her voice trembling. She knew. I could see in her eyes that she knew something bad was happening, even if she didn't understand the mechanics of it. I'm not hungry anymore, I said. I looked at the roast chicken, golden and perfect. I looked at the wine glasses. I looked at my son, who was now frowning, trying to decipher if he had won or lost. He thought he had just put me in my place. He thought I was retreating in defeat. Enjoy the rest of your night, I said. And Cheryl, the spotlight is all yours. I turned and walked to the front door. My heels clicked on the hardwood floor, the floor I paid for. I opened the heavy oak door and stepped out into the humid Florida night. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently with a soft click. That click was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a bank vault closing. It was the sound of a safety net being pulled away. I walked to my car, a sensible sedan parked behind Cheryl's flashy convertible. I got in, started the engine, and drove away. Russell thought he had just established the pecking order. He thought he had elevated his father and his new wife while pushing me down. He had no idea what he had actually done. He didn't know that the background player was the only thing standing between him and financial ruin. He wanted the new wife to be the woman of the house. Fine. Let's see if she can pay the bill. My apartment was quiet when I walked in. That was the first thing I noticed. There was no clinking of expensive wine glasses, no forced laughter, and no one trying to prove they were the most important person in the room. Just the steady hum of my refrigerator and the soft, yellow light from the street lamp filtering through the blinds. I kicked off my heels and placed them neatly by the door. My apartment isn't a palace. It's a 2-bedroom unit in a sturdy, older building. It doesn't have crown molding or imported Italian tile, but it has something Russell's house doesn't have. It's paid for. Every square inch of it belongs to me. There is no bank note hovering over my head. There is no debt keeping me awake at 3 a.m. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I thought I would be shaking with anger after what Russell said, but the anger had settled into something else. It felt like clarity. It felt like waking up from a long, confusing dream and finally seeing the room for what it really was. You're just not half the woman Dad's new wife is. The words echoed in the empty kitchen. They didn't hurt as much as they did an hour ago. Now, they just felt like a challenge. I took my glass of water and walked into the second bedroom. I call it my office, though it's really just a guest room with a heavy oak desk in the corner. That desk has been with me for 30 years. It's covered in scratches and ring marks from coffee mugs, but it's solid. It has held up piles of paperwork, tax returns, and late-night budget calculations while the rest of the world slept. I sat down and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the room with a cool blue light. I adjusted my glasses and clicked on the browser icon. My fingers moved automatically, typing in the website for the bank I had used for decades. I worked as a senior retirement planner for 25 years. My job was to look at reality. People would come to me with dreams of sailboats and villas, and I had to be the one to show them the math. I had to tell them what was possible and what was a fantasy. I was good at it. I was the person who made sure the numbers added up so that when the party was over, the lights didn't get turned off. My ex-husband, Tom, was the opposite. Tom was a salesman. He sold dreams. He sold the idea that money was infinite and that tomorrow would always pay for today. When we were married, I spent every weekend balancing our accounts, moving money from savings to checking just to cover the checks he wrote for golf clubs, dinners, and investments that never went anywhere. He was the hero with the credit card at the restaurant. I was the villain at the kitchen table asking how we were going to pay the electric bill. I logged into my account. The dashboard loaded, showing my balances, checking, savings, retirement, and then the fourth account. It was labeled the TNR Family Trust. T for Tom, R for Russell. I stared at the number on the screen. It was a joint account I had set up 2 years ago, right around the time Russell and Stacy bought their house. Russell believes this account is funded by his father. Tom had told him, with his chest puffed out, "I've set up a trust distribution for you, son, to help with the mortgage. Consider it the dividends from my hard work." Russell had cried. He had hugged his father and called him the greatest man he knew. But Tom didn't put a dime in that account. Tom couldn't. Tom was leveraged up to his eyeballs in his new marriage and his leased luxury cars. When Russell bought that house, Tom had panicked. He had promised to help, but he didn't have the cash. He came to me, begging. He said it would break Russell's heart to know the truth. He said he just needed a little bridge loan until his next deal closed. So I stepped in. I didn't do it for Tom. I did it for Russell. I wanted my son to have his home. I wanted him to feel secure. And, foolishly, I wanted him to be proud of his father. I let Tom take the credit. I set up the automatic transfer from my personal savings into the TNR Family Trust every month, $2,800. Every single month, on the 15th, the money left my account, went into the trust, and then was automatically pulled to pay Russell's mortgage. For 2 years, I paid for the roof over his head. For 2 years, I paid for the cozy suburban home, where he just told me I was a failure. I clicked on the transaction history. There it was. A long list of transfers. $2,800. $2,800. $2,800. That money was my vacation fund. It was the renovation for my kitchen. It was the trip to Europe I never took. It was my silence. I leaned back in my chair. Russell thought I was a background player. He thought I was cautious and boring. He didn't understand that the only reason his life looked so stable was because I was holding it up with my own 2 hands. He thought Cheryl was dynamic because she spent money. He didn't realize that spending money is easy. Earning it, saving it, and giving it away without asking for a thank you, that is the hard part. But he didn't want a silent partner anymore. He wanted a spotlight. He wanted the new wife energy. Okay, Russell, I whispered to the empty room. You want the new wife. You can have her. I moved the mouse cursor to the tab marked Scheduled Transfers. My heart wasn't racing. I didn't feel malicious. I felt like a teacher who finally realizes the student will never learn if I keep doing the homework for him. If I kept paying, I wasn't helping him. I was enabling the lie. I was paying for the privilege of being disrespected. I looked at the line item, monthly transfer to TNR Trust. Next payment scheduled. Tomorrow. Tomorrow was the 15th. The mortgage was due on the 17th. If I stopped this now, the chain reaction would be immediate. The trust account was empty. I kept it at 0 balance, transferring the exact amount needed just in time. If I didn't send the money tomorrow, the auto draft for the mortgage would hit an empty account. It would bounce. I hovered over the edit button. Then I moved to cancel. A warning box popped up on the screen, bright red letters asking me if I was sure. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transaction? I thought about the dinner. I thought about Cheryl's smug smile. I thought about Russell telling me to step back. He wanted me to step back. Fine. I would step back so far he wouldn't even see me. I wasn't doing this to destroy him. I was doing this to show him reality. Reality is cold. Reality doesn't care about your dad's vision. Reality costs $2,800 a month. I clicked yes. The screen refreshed. The line item was gone. The schedule was empty. Recurring transfer canceled. The green text at the top of the screen confirmed it. It was done. I sat there for a moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The burden I had been carrying for 2 years, the secret, the financial weight, the emotional labor of protecting Tom's ego, it just lifted off my shoulders. I felt lighter. I closed the laptop with a soft snap. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot. I imagined what was happening at Russell's house right now. They were probably still drinking wine. Cheryl was probably telling another story about a hotel in Paris. Russell was probably laughing, feeling lucky to be part of such a glamorous family. They had no idea that the engine running their life had just been turned off. I turned off the light in my office. I was ready for bed. For the first time in a long time, I was going to sleep soundly. As I walked to my bedroom, I whispered one last thing into the darkness. Let's see how much woman Cheryl is when the bill comes due. 30 days. That is how long it takes for a habit to break. Or so they say. For 30 days, I didn't check the stock market. I didn't look at Russell's bank balance. I didn't worry about whether Tom's visionary business deals were actually closing or just expanding his debt. For 30 days, I just lived. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 month after that disastrous dinner. The Florida sun was already warm, but the air in my garden felt fresh. I was on my knees in the dirt, planting marigolds. I love marigolds. They are tough. They don't need much fussing over. You put them in the ground, give them a little water, and they bloom bright and strong, asking for nothing in return. They remind me of the woman I used to be before I let my family treat me like a doormat. I wiped a smudge of soil off my cheek and sat back on my heels. I took a sip of my lemonade. It was quiet. The only sound was the wind in the palm fronds and the distant hum of traffic. I looked at my watch. It was 9:15 a.m. A small, cold smile touched my lips. I knew that time. For 2 years, 9:15 a.m. on the 17th of the month was a sacred time. That was the moment the automated system at the bank processed the mortgage payments. That was the moment the computer at the bank would reach out to the TNR Family Trust account looking for $2,800. For 24 months, that computer found the money waiting there, placed by me silently and reliably. But today was different. Today, at 9:15 a.m., that computer was going to reach out and grab a handful of air. I didn't need to be at Russell's house to know exactly what was happening. I had raised that boy. I knew his routine. I knew he was sitting at his kitchen island right now, probably drinking an espresso from that expensive machine Stacy insisted they needed. He would be checking his phone, scrolling through emails, feeling good about himself. He probably felt like a man who had everything under control. And then the notification would hit. I could almost see it. The phone would vibrate against the marble countertop. A little banner would slide down from the top of the screen. It wouldn't be a friendly payment successful message. It would be the one notification no homeowner ever wants to see. Payment failed. Insufficient funds. I imagined Russell frowning. He would stare at the screen, thinking it was a mistake. He would tap the app, refresh the page, waiting for the glitch to fix itself. That's weird, he would mutter. He would assume it was a banking error. After all, his father was rich. His father was the great Tom Welker. Tom didn't bounce checks. Tom didn't miss payments. The family trust was supposed to be a bottomless well of Dad's generosity. I took another sip of lemonade and watched a butterfly land on the fence. I wondered how long it would take him to call Tom. Across town, the chaos was unfolding exactly as I predicted. Russell didn't call me first. Why would he? In his mind, I was just the bitter ex-wife who walked out of dinner. I wasn't the money. Tom was the money. So he called Tom. I learned later what that conversation sounded like. It was a masterpiece of confusion and incompetence. Russell called his dad in a panic. Dad, the mortgage didn't go through. The bank sent me a nasty alert. It says insufficient funds. Now, you have to understand, Tom. My ex-husband is a man who believes that if he ignores a problem long enough, it will disappear. He lives in a world of big pictures and conceptual frameworks. He doesn't do details. What are you talking about, son? Tom would have said, probably from the golf course. That's on auto pay. The business handles it. It bounced, Dad. It says zero balance. That's impossible. Tom would have blustered. I'll have my people look into it. Probably just a wire transfer delay. You know how these banks are. They hold on to your cash to make interest on the float. Don't worry about it. But Dad, they're charging me a late fee. And it looks bad on my credit. Relax, Russell. It's a glitch. I'll make a call. But Tom couldn't make a call. Because Tom didn't know who to call. For 2 years, Tom had enjoyed the praise for paying that mortgage without ever once looking at a bank statement. He truly believed that his business structure was so successful that money just magically appeared where it was needed. He had deluded himself into thinking his vague promises of setting up a trust had actually materialized into cash. He didn't know that the business structure was me sitting at a kitchen table writing a check from my savings account. Tom hung up, likely annoyed that his golf game was interrupted, assuming it would sort itself out. He had no idea there was no money. He had no idea the safety net was gone. Russell must have sat there for 10 minutes staring at his phone. The glitch wasn't fixing itself. The balance was still zero. And for the first time, a cold sliver of doubt must have pierced his heart. He refreshed the screen again. Nothing. Then panic set in. Real panic. The kind that makes your palms sweat. He looked at Stacy. He looked at the house he couldn't afford. He realized that if his dad didn't fix this, he had to come up with nearly $3,000 by the end of the day to avoid a hit on his credit report. And he didn't have it. He checked his own savings. Maybe a few $100s. He checked his credit cards. Maxed out from the trip to Italy he took to bond with Cheryl. He was trapped. And that is when he remembered me. I was in the garden, pulling up a weed that had dared to encroach on my petunias when my phone started to vibrate on the patio table. I didn't look up immediately. I finished pulling the weed, shook the dirt off the roots, and tossed it into the compost bucket. Only then did I wipe my hands on my apron and walk over to the table. The screen was lighting up. Russell calling. I stared at the name. For 30 years, that name on my phone meant drop everything. If Russell called, I answered. If he needed money, I transferred it. If he needed advice, I gave it. If he needed comfort, I provided it. I was the mother. That was my job. But then I remembered his voice from the dinner. You're just not half the woman Dad's new wife is. If I wasn't half the woman, then I certainly wasn't the woman who solved financial emergencies. That sounded like a job for a dynamic woman. That sounded like a job for Cheryl. The phone kept ringing. It buzzed angrily against the glass table. I reached out, my finger hovering over the green button. It was instinct. It was the habit of a lifetime trying to pull me back in. I could answer. I could tell him, "Oh, don't worry, honey. I'll fix it. I'll transfer the money right now." I could save him. Again. But if I saved him, he would never learn. If I saved him, he would go right back to thinking his father was a hero and I was just the background noise. He would go back to disrespecting me the moment the check cleared. I pulled my hand back. I let it ring. The ringing stopped. The screen went dark. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The silence returned to the garden, sweeter than before. 2 minutes later, the phone buzzed again. Then a text message pinged. "Mom, please pick up. It's an emergency." "Mom, something is wrong with the trust account. Dad isn't answering." "Mom, are you there?" I read the messages. I felt a twinge of guilt, sharp and familiar, but I pushed it down. I picked up my watering can. The marigolds needed water. The sun was getting high, and if I didn't tend to them, now they would wilt. I walked back to the flower bed, leaving the phone on the table. Russell was about to learn a very expensive lesson in finance. He was about to learn that money doesn't come from vision. It doesn't come from status. And it certainly doesn't come from a father who treats his family like an audience for his one-man show. Money comes from work. It comes from sacrifice. And when you insult the person who signs the checks stop coming. I poured the water over the thirsty flowers and hummed a little tune. It was cruel, maybe, but sometimes you have to let the house of cards fall so people can finally see that the foundation was missing all along. I didn't answer the phone for the rest of the day. I wasn't in Russell's kitchen that afternoon, but I didn't need to be. I knew the layout of the room. I knew how the afternoon sun hit the quartz countertops I had helped him pick out. And I knew exactly what desperation looked like on my son's face. By 4 p.m., the silence from my end was deafening. Russell had called me 5 times. He had texted me 6 times. He had called his father a dozen times, only to be sent to voicemail because Tom was likely on the back nine, losing money he didn't have on a wager he couldn't afford. The deadline for the mortgage payment was 5 p.m. After that, the late fee would kick in, and the mark on his credit report would follow shortly after. For a young man trying to build a reputation in the business world, a bounced mortgage payment is like a stain on a white shirt. It's the only thing people see. Russell was pacing the kitchen floor. Stacy was sitting at the island, her head in her hands. The air was thick with panic. Then, the doorbell rang. Russell probably jumped, hoping it was me, hoping I had driven over with a check in hand, ready to apologize for being so stubborn and fix everything like I always did. But it wasn't me. It was Cheryl. She breezed in, smelling of expensive perfume and carrying a shopping bag from a high-end boutique. She had stopped by to show off a new scarf she had bought, completely oblivious to the fact that the house she was standing in was financially on fire. "Oh, you two look so serious." Cheryl laughed, tossing her keys on the counter. "Don't tell me you're working on a Tuesday afternoon. Tom always says life is too short to stress." Russell stopped pacing. He looked at Cheryl, and in that moment, a desperate idea formed in his mind. He remembered what he had said at dinner. Dad's new wife is the dynamic one. She matches his status. If she was the woman of status, surely she had access to liquid cash. Tom always bragged about how well Cheryl managed their lifestyle. Surely, a measly $3,000 was pocket change to her. Russell wiped the sweat from his forehead and put on his best smile. It was a shaky, fragile thing. "Hey, Cheryl," he said, his voice tight. "Actually, I'm glad you stopped by. We have a bit of a technical situation." Cheryl paused, holding up the silk scarf. "Technical?" "Yeah," Russell lied. "The bank is having a glitch with the trust account. Dad isn't answering, and the mortgage is due in an hour. It's ridiculous, really just a banking error, but I need to clear it manually." He took a breath. "Could you spot me $3,000? Just until tomorrow. I'll wire it back as soon as Dad fixes the glitch." Stacy looked up, hopeful. It seemed like a simple solution. Cheryl stared at him. Then, she did something that chilled the room. She laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was a confused, incredulous laugh. $3,000? Russell, honey, I don't have $3,000 sitting in my checking account. Russell blinked. "What? But you and Dad, the trips, the car." Cheryl waved her hand dismissively. "That's all on credit, sweetie, or through the business lines. I have an allowance, sure, but I spent that days ago. Why do you think I'm here? I was going to see if Tom left his corporate card here by mistake." The room went deadly silent. "Wait," Russell said, the color draining from his face. "You don't have access to the family accounts." "There are no family accounts," Cheryl said, her voice turning sharp. "Tom handles the big money. I just handle the social calendar. I thought you were the one with the trust fund. I figured that house was paid for in cash with the way Tom talks about it." She looked around the kitchen, her eyes narrowing. "Wait a minute. Are you telling me you guys are broke?" "We aren't broke," Russell snapped, his voice cracking. "It's just a glitch with the transfer." "Well, don't look at me," Cheryl said, grabbing her shopping bag. "I married your father for the lifestyle, Russell, not to bail out his adult children. If the check bounced, that's between you and him. I have a nail appointment." And just like that, the dynamic woman, the woman I wasn't half of, turned on her heel and walked out. She didn't offer to help. She didn't offer to call Tom. She protected herself. The front door closed, leaving Russell and Stacy alone in the wreckage of their assumptions. Russell sank onto the bar stool. The reality was setting in. There was no magical pot of gold. There was no wealthy stepmother coming to save the day. I don't understand, Russell whispered. The money has been there every month for 2 years. Dad said he set it up. It happens automatically. Stacy stood up. She walked over to the laptop sitting open on the counter. Stacy is quiet, but she is observant. She had been listening to me for years, even when Russell wasn't. Russell, she said firmly, log into the bank. I told you it says insufficient funds. He groaned. Log in, she commanded. I want to see the history. Russell typed in his password with shaking fingers. The dashboard loaded. The big red zero stared back at them. Go to the transfers, Stacy said. Look at the incoming deposits for the last year. Russell clicked the tab. A list of transactions appeared. Green numbers. Plus $2,800. Plus $2,800. Plus $2,800. See, Russell pointed. TNR Family Trust. It's Dad. Click on the details, Stacy said. Click on the routing number it came from. Russell clicked. The little information box expanded. Usually, people don't look at this part. As long as the money is green, they don't care where it grows. But now they had to look. The source of the funds wasn't Welker Enterprises. It wasn't Thomas Welker Holdings. The source bank was the local credit union. The account nickname, visible in the transaction metadata, was simple. D. Welker Personal Savings. Russell stared at the screen. He blinked, trying to make the words change. D. Welker, he whispered. Dawn. It's your mother, Stacy said softly. She sounded like she had the wind knocked out of her. It's been your mother the whole time. No, Russell shook his head, looking frantic. Dad said he set up the trust. Your dad lied, Russell. Stacy's voice rose. Or he made a promise he couldn't keep. And your mother covered for him. Look at the dates. She pointed to the screen. Every month. The 15th. Like clockwork. For 24 months. Then she scrolled to the top. To the current month. There was nothing. No transfer on the 15th. The dinner was 2 days ago, Stacy said, her voice trembling. The 14th. Russell went pale. He looked like he was going to be sick. The timeline crashed down on him. On the 14th, he sat at his table, drank wine paid for by his mother, in a house paid for by his mother, and told her she wasn't half the woman Cheryl was. On the 15th, the money stopped. He looked at his phone, lying on the counter where he had tossed it. The silence for me wasn't a punishment. It was a resignation. I had accepted his terms. I had stepped back. She paid for everything, Russell whispered, the horror rising in his throat. She paid the mortgage. She probably paid for the down payment, help too. She did it all, and she let Dad take the credit. And you told her she was nothing? Stacy said. She wasn't yelling. She was just stating the facts. You told her to step aside. Russell put his head in his hands. The clock on the microwave read 4:45 p.m. The house of cards hadn't just crumbled. It had evaporated. He realized then that the status he worshipped was a mirage, and the background player he dismissed was the only thing that had been real. He grabbed his phone again. He didn't call his father this time. He dialed my number, but he didn't dial it with entitlement. He dialed it with fear. I saw the call coming in. I was in my kitchen, making tea. I let it ring. He needed to sit in this feeling. He needed to understand that the woman who pays the mortgage is the woman who commands respect. And until he understood that in his bones, no amount of money would save him. The voicemail picked up. The sun began to set on Russell's house, and for the first time, he realized just how dark it gets when the person holding the light walks away. The knock on my door didn't come until the next morning. I expected it. I had spent the morning cleaning my apartment, not because it was dirty, but because cleaning gives you time to think. I wiped down the counters, organized my mail, and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. I was ready. When I opened the door, Russell looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were rimmed with red. He didn't look like the confident young executive who had sat at the head of the table 3 nights ago. He looked like a frightened boy who had lost his favorite toy. He didn't say hello. He just walked past me into the living room, the energy of his panic filling the small space. "How could you do this to us?" he demanded, spinning around to face me. His voice was shaking. "Do you have any idea what happened yesterday? I had to take a cash advance on a credit card with 20% interest just to keep the bank from flagging my account. I was humiliated, Mom. Humiliated." I closed the door gently. I didn't raise my voice. I walked over to my armchair, the comfortable beige one I've had for 10 years, and sat down. I gestured to the sofa opposite me. "Sit down, Russell," I said. "I don't want to sit down," he shouted, pacing the rug. "I want to know why you played this sick game. Stacy showed me the bank records. It was you. All this time, it was you. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me think it was Dad? And then, why did you just cut me off without a warning?" He stopped pacing and pointed a finger at me. "You did this to punish me. Because of what I said at dinner. That's it, isn't it? You're petty." I took a deep breath. This was the defense mechanism I expected. Anger is easier than gratitude. Blame is easier than shame. He wanted to make me the villain because if I was the villain, he didn't have to feel bad about how he treated me. "Are you finished?" I asked calmly. "No, I'm not finished," he snapped. "We almost lost the house. Stacy is a wreck. Do you know what it feels like to find out your whole financial life is a lie?" "Yes," I said. "I do know what that feels like. I lived with your father for 30 years. That stopped him. He opened his mouth to retort, but closed it. He sank onto the sofa, looking defeated. He rubbed his face with his hands. "Why, Mom?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Why did you pay it secretly? Why let Dad take the credit?" I reached under the coffee table and pulled out a manila folder. I had prepared it last night. I placed it on the table between us. "Open it," I said. Russell hesitated, then leaned forward and flipped the folder open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a spreadsheet. Simple, organized, columns and rows. That is a record of every transfer I made to the TNR Family Trust for the last 24 months. I explained. $2,800 a month, multiplied by 24 months. Russell looked at the total at the bottom of the page. $67,200. He stared at the number. $67,000. That is a lot of money. That is a luxury car. That is a down payment. That is a retirement nest egg. Your father was supposed to pay it, I said, keeping my voice even. When you bought the house, he promised to help. But when the first bill came due, he didn't have the money. He called me in a panic. He said if he told you the truth, that he was over-leveraged and cash poor, it would crush you. He begged me to cover it just for a few months until his deal closed. I looked at my son. I didn't want you to see your hero fail, Russell. I wanted you to feel secure in your home. So I paid it. And then the next month came, and he still didn't have it. And the next. It became a habit. I paid for your security with my silence. Russell ran his finger over the rows of numbers. He looked sick. I had no idea, he whispered. I thought he was handling it. I know you did, I said, and because you thought he was handling it, you treated him like a king. You gave him the head of the table. You poured him the best wine. You listened to his stories about vision and success with stars in your eyes. I leaned forward slightly, and me, I was just the background player. I was the cautious one. The boring one. Russell flinched. He couldn't meet my eyes. But that's not why I stopped paying. Russell, I continued. I didn't stop because I was angry. I didn't stop to be petty. Then why? He asked, looking up at me with watery eyes. Because of what you said, I replied. And I don't mean the insult. I mean the logic. I stood up and walked over to the window. I needed him to hear this clearly. You sat at that table and told me I wasn't half the woman Cheryl is. You said she matched your father's status. You said she was dynamic. I turned back to him. You said I wasn't half the woman she is. I assumed that meant she was twice as rich. So I stepped back to let the better woman take care of you. The room went dead silent. The words hung there, heavy and undeniable. Russell opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He realized the trap he had built for himself. He had equated value with flashiness. He had equated worth with appearance. He had insulted the hand that fed him because he liked the shiny jewelry on the other hand better. I figured. I went on that if Cheryl is such a high-status woman, surely she could handle a simple mortgage payment. Surely the woman who vacations in Italy doesn't need help from a boring retirement planner. Russell looked down at his shoes. His face was burning red. The shame was radiating off him in waves. She laughed at me. Russell whispered. Who? Cheryl, he said, his voice cracking. When I asked her for help yesterday, she laughed. She said she didn't have the money. She said she married Dad for the lifestyle, not to bail us out. I nodded slowly. Of course she did, because that is who she is. She is a consumer. Russell. She consumes attention, she consumes money, and she consumes credit. But she doesn't build anything. When the bill comes, people like Cheryl leave the table. I walked back to the chair and sat down. I picked up my coffee cup. I am not half the woman she is. I said softly, I am the woman who paid your bills for 2 years without asking for a thank you. I am the woman who secured your future while she spent it. I am the woman who has a positive net worth and a paid-off apartment. I took a sip of coffee. And now I am the woman who is retired from paying your mortgage. Russell closed the folder. He looked at the plain manila cover. He looked at me. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking at Mom, the cautious ex-wife. He was looking at a woman he didn't recognize, a woman of immense strength who had finally decided to stop carrying him. I'm sorry, he whispered. It was the first genuine thing he had said since he walked in. I know you are, I said. You're sorry because you're scared. You're sorry because the safety net is gone, and you have to actually figure out how to live the lifestyle you've been pretending to afford. I stood up again. The conversation was over. I wasn't going to hug him and tell him it would be okay. I wasn't going to fix this. You should go home to your wife, Russell. You have a lot of math to do, and I suggest you start by looking at your father's vision a little more closely. Russell stood up slowly. He looked like an old man. He walked to the door, clutching the folder, the evidence of his mother's love and his own blindness. He paused at the threshold. What am I going to do? You'll figure it out, I said. You're smart. You just got distracted by the glitter. He nodded, swallowed hard, and walked out. I locked the door behind him. I went back to my chair and looked at the empty spot on the table where the folder had been. It cost me $67,000 to teach my son that lesson. It was expensive, but seeing him finally understand the value of $1 and the value of his mother, that was priceless. I didn't want to go back to that house. The last time I walked through Russell's front door, I was leaving behind a plate of roast chicken and a lifetime of being taken for granted. But Russell had called me again. This time, he didn't sound angry, and he didn't sound scared. He sounded exhausted. He said, Dad is here. He wants a family meeting. He says he's going to straighten this whole mess out. I almost laughed. Straightening things out was Tom's code for bullying people until they agreed with him. It was his code for rewriting history until he looked like the hero and everyone else looked like the problem. I drove over on a Thursday evening. When I walked into the living room, the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. Russell and Stacy were sitting on the love seat, looking like two kids waiting outside the principal's office. Cheryl was there, too, scrolling on her phone in the corner, looking bored. And there was Tom. My ex-husband was standing by the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch. He looked exactly the same as he did when we were married. Tan, confident, and completely detached from reality. He was wearing a polo shirt that I knew cost $200, and he had that look on his face. The look that said, "I am the captain, and you are all just lucky to be on my ship." "Dawn," he said, not offering a hello. He took a sip of his drink and shook his head, looking at me with theatrical disappointment. "I have to say, I am shocked. I didn't think you had a cruel bone in your body. But cutting off your own son? Jeopardizing his home, just to prove a point? That is low, even for you." I closed the door and stood my ground. I didn't sit down. I didn't want to be comfortable. "Hello, Tom," I said. "I see you're drinking the good scotch. Who paid for that bottle?" "Russell." Tom's eyes narrowed. "Don't deflect, Dawn. We are here to discuss your erratic behavior. Russell tells me you sabotaged the trust account. You pulled the rug out from under him." "There is no trust account, Tom," I said clearly. "There never was. There was just my savings account and your ego." "That is a technicality." Tom boomed. He loved to shout to cover up the fact that he was lying. "I set up the arrangement. I facilitated the purchase of this house. I told Russell I would handle it, and I delegated the execution to you. That is how a partnership works. The visionary sets the course. The operator handles the details. You were the operator, and you failed your duty." I looked at Russell. He was watching his father, his eyes wide. For years, Russell had bought into this. He believed that Tom's vision was the currency of the realm. "I didn't fail," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I resigned. There is a difference. You don't resign from being a mother." Tom shouted, stepping closer. "You don't leave your child high and dry because your feelings got hurt at a dinner party. You selfish woman. You have always been small-minded, Dawn. You worry about pennies while I am trying to build a legacy for this boy." The word selfish hung in the air. That was the trigger. For 30 years, every time I asked him not to buy a new car we couldn't afford, I was selfish. Every time I asked him to put money aside for taxes instead of a vacation, I was small-minded. Every time I saved us from ruin, I was the villain because I made him look at the math. I felt a fire ignite in my chest, but this wasn't the wild, uncontrolled fire of anger. It was the controlled burn of truth. "Let's talk about your legacy, Tom," I said. I walked into the center of the room. I looked at Russell, then at Stacy, then finally at Tom. "You call me the operator," I said. "That's fine. I'll accept that title, because in this family, I wasn't just the ex-wife. I was the CEO of your survival." "Don't be dramatic," Tom scoffed. "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being accurate." I said, "Russell, do you remember when you were 10 years old and Dad bought that boat? The Sea King? He told you he had a great quarter at work." Russell nodded slowly. "Yeah, we went fishing every weekend." "He didn't have a great quarter," I said. "He had just been fired. He bought that boat with the severance package that was supposed to last us 6 months. I had to go back to work full-time and take night shifts doing tax returns just to put food on the table while he played captain on the weekends." Tom's face turned red. "That was an investment. We sold that boat for a profit. We sold that boat because the IRS put a lien on it, Tom. I shot back, and I was the one who negotiated the payment plan, so you wouldn't go to jail for tax evasion. The room went silent. Cheryl looked up from her phone. She didn't know this part of the story. And when you went to college, Russell, I continued, turning to my son, Dad told you he cashed in some stocks to pay your tuition. Remember? He made a big speech about it at your graduation party. Yes, Russell whispered. He didn't have any stocks, I said. He gambled away his portfolio in the late 90s. I paid your tuition. I cashed out my inheritance from my grandmother. The money she left me to travel the world. I used every penny of it to make sure you graduated debt-free. And I let him give the speech. I sat in the back and clapped while he took the bow. Russell looked at his father. Dad, is that true? Tom sputtered. She's twisting things. Money is fungible. Russell, it all comes from the same pot. No, Tom, I said, my voice cutting through his bluster. It doesn't come from the same pot. It came from my pot, because your pot has a hole in the bottom. I turned back to Tom. I was done protecting him. I was done protecting the myth. You are a big spender, Tom. You always have been. You are charming and you are fun and you tell great stories. But you have never, not once in your life, paid the full price for admission. You let other people pay. You let me pay. I pointed at the house around us. You wanted Russell to have this house to feed your ego. You wanted to look like the rich patriarch. But when the bill came, you didn't have it. You made me pay your debt so you could keep your status. And I did it. I did it because I loved our son. I took a step closer to him. He actually took a step back. The visionary was shrinking. But then, I said, Russell looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't half the woman your new wife is. He told me to step back. I looked over at Cheryl. She was staring at me, her mouth slightly open. And that made me realize something, Tom. I realized I was tired. I was tired of being the janitor for your parade. I was tired of cleaning up the confetti and the elephant dung while you waved to the crowd. So I stopped. I said simply, I stopped cleaning. And look what happened. It took exactly 30 days for your entire legacy to bounce. Tom looked around the room. He looked at Cheryl, who was looking at him with a new, calculating expression. He looked at Russell, who was looking at him with betrayal. He had lost the audience. You're a bitter woman, Tom spat out, but there was no power in his voice anymore. You're just trying to humiliate me. No, Tom, I said, I'm just balancing the ledger. You've been living on credit, financial credit, and emotional credit for 40 years. Today, the bill came due. I turned to Russell. He looked devastated. The hero he had worshipped his whole life was gone, replaced by a man holding a glass of scotch he couldn't afford. Russell, I said softly, I didn't do this to hurt you. I did this because you need to know who is actually in your corner. A hero isn't the person who promises you the moon. A hero is the person who pays the electric bill so you can see the moon. I grabbed my purse. The air in the room had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was clear, painfully clear. I'm leaving now, I said. Tom, I assume since you are the visionary, you'll be writing the check to bring the mortgage current, or perhaps Cheryl can use her allowance. Cheryl let out a sharp, cold laugh. Not a chance, Dawn. My money stays in my account. Tom looked at his new wife, shocked. Cheryl, but we're partners. We're partners in fun, Tom, Cheryl said, standing up. I didn't sign up for debt. I opened the front door. The cool night air hit my face. Good luck, everyone, I said. I walked out to my car. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening in that living room. The myth was dead. The statue had crumbled. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the one to glue it back together. 2 days passed after the explosion at Russell's house. 2 days of absolute radio silence. I didn't call to check on them. I didn't text Stacy to see if they were okay. I stayed in my lane. I went to the grocery store. I bought fresh fruit. I read a book on my balcony. I was done chasing people who didn't want to be caught. When the doorbell finally rang on Saturday afternoon, I knew who it was. It wasn't the frantic, angry pounding of a son demanding answers. It was a hesitant, soft knock, the kind of knock that asks for permission to exist. I opened the door. Russell and Stacy were standing there. They looked like they had aged 10 years in 48 hours. Russell's shoulders were slumped, and the arrogance that usually held his chin up was gone. Stacy looked tired, but there was something else in her eyes, a sharpness I hadn't seen before. "Hi, Mom," Russell said. His voice was cracked. "Come in," I said. I didn't offer them food. I didn't rush to make coffee. I walked to the living room and sat in my armchair. They sat on the sofa, close together, holding hands like two castaways on a raft. The silence stretched out. It wasn't awkward. It was necessary. "We saw Dad yesterday." Russell started looking at the floor. "He told us he couldn't help. He said his assets are liquid right now. He gave me a lecture on bootstrapping and then got in his leased Mercedes and drove away." "I'm not surprised," I said. "Cheryl blocked my number." Stacy added quietly. She said she didn't want negative energy in her life. I nodded. "People like them are only around for the harvest, Russell. They never stay for the planting." Russell took a deep breath. He squeezed Stacy's hand so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked up at me, and his eyes were wet. "I am so sorry, Mom. For everything. For what I said at dinner. For the last 2 years. For not seeing you." "I know you are," I said gently, "and I accept your apology." Russell let out a breath, looking relieved. He leaned forward, a spark of hope returning to his eyes. "Thank you. That means everything. Look, Mom, we've been looking at the numbers all night. It's a mess. If we don't pay the bank by Monday, the pre-foreclosure process starts. It ruins everything. My credit, my job prospects, everything." He paused, waiting for me to jump in. When I didn't, he continued, faster this time. "So, I was hoping, now that we cleared the air, maybe we could restart the arrangement just for a few months, just until I get a promotion or find a side gig. I swear I'll pay you back eventually. But right now we are drowning. We just need the tap turned back on." There it was. The ask. He thought that an apology was a coin you put in a vending machine to get a result. He thought that saying, "I'm sorry," wiped the slate clean and restored the bank balance. He still didn't get it. I looked at my son. I loved him more than my own life. But loving someone doesn't mean saving them from themselves. "No," I said. The word hung in the air, simple and heavy. Russell blinked. "What?" "The answer is no, Russell. I will not restart the payments. Not for a few months. Not for 1 month. But you accepted my apology," he stammered. "You said you forgave me." "I do forgive you," I said, "but forgiveness is emotional. Money is practical. Those are two different things." "Mom, please," he begged, his voice rising in desperation. "We will lose the house. We can't afford the mortgage on our own. It's too high." "Then you are living in the wrong house," I said. Russell looked like I had slapped him. "How can you be so cold? You have the money. You showed me the chart. You have savings." "I do," I said firmly. "And those savings are my freedom. They are my security against a world that overlooks women my age. I spent 2 years pouring that security into a hole because I wanted you to feel big. I wanted you to feel successful. But Russell, you aren't successful if your mother is paying your bills." I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the parking lot. I realized something this week. I said, turning back to them. Money without respect is just servitude. When I pay your bills while you treat me like a background player, I am not being a mother. I am being a servant. I am being a doormat. And I am too old and too tired to be a doormat anymore. I respect you. Russell cried. I do. I see it now. You respect me because you need me. I corrected him. That isn't respect. That is hunger. You are hungry, so you are being nice to the cook. True respect is what you give someone when they have nothing to give you in return. Russell slumped back against the cushions. He looked defeated. He looked like a child who had finally been told that Santa Claus wasn't coming. So that's it, he whispered. You're just going to let us crash. I am not letting you crash, I said. I am letting you stand. You are 30 years old. Russell, you are a man. A man doesn't live in a house he can't afford to impress a father who doesn't care. A man makes hard choices. I looked at him with intense focus. This is the best thing that could happen to you. Losing that house will be the best thing that ever happens to you, because it will break the spell. You will stop trying to be Tom Welker's son, and you will start being Russell Welker. Russell put his head in his hands. I can't do it. It's too much. You can, a soft voice said. We both looked at Stacy. She hadn't spoken the entire time. She had just watched the tennis match between me and Russell. Now, she sat up straighter. She pulled her hand away from Russell's grip and placed it on his knee. She's right, Russell, Stacy said. Russell looked at her, shocked. Whose side are you on? I'm on our side, Stacy said firmly. And your mother is right. We can't afford that house. We never could. We were living a lie. Every time we walked through that front door, I felt sick because I knew we were one paycheck away from disaster. I just didn't know your mom was the one holding back the flood. Stacy turned to me. Her eyes were clear. There was no anger in them, only a strange kind of relief. Thank you, Dawn, she said. Stacy, Russell hissed. She's cutting us off. No, she's waking us up, Stacy shot back. Russell, look at her. Look at your mother. She has been carrying us for 2 years. She has been carrying your dad's lies for 30 years. Don't you think she deserves to put the load down? Russell looked at me. Really looked at me. He saw the gray in my hair. He saw the lines around my eyes. He saw the simple clothes I wore so that he could have crown molding. We have to sell the house, Stacy said, her voice practical and steady. We have enough equity to cover the selling costs. We can move into a condo, something smaller, something we can pay for with our own jobs. But what will people say? Russell whispered. What will Dad say? Who cares what Dad says? Stacy said, her voice rising. Dad isn't paying the bills. Dawn is right. We need to stop living for an audience. Stacy stood up. She walked over to me. She didn't hug me, but she took my hands. We will figure it out, Stacy said to me. We will list the house on Monday. It will be hard, but we will do it. I squeezed her hands. I know you will. You are stronger than you think, Stacy. Russell sat on the sofa for a long moment. He looked from Stacy to me. He realized the dynamic had shifted. The women in the room were no longer competing for his attention. We were aligned. We were the adults in the room. He stood up slowly. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked humbled. I guess we're moving, he said, his voice quiet. I guess you are, I said. He walked over to the door, then stopped. He turned back to me. Can we still come over for dinner? He asked. Even if there is no check. I smiled. It was a real smile this time. Ideally, you bring the wine, I said. But yes, you can come for dinner. The door is always open, but the bank is closed. Russell nodded. He looked at me with a new expression. It wasn't fear. It wasn't hunger. It was awe. Okay, he said. Okay, Mom. They walked out the door together. They didn't have a check in their hands. They had a massive problem to solve. They had a house to sell and a life to downsize. But as I watched them walk to their car, talking animatedly to each other, planning their next move, I knew I had done the right thing. I hadn't just saved my retirement. I had saved my son. I had forced him to become a man. I closed the door and locked it. The silence in the apartment was beautiful. It wasn't lonely. It was the sound of freedom. I walked to my kitchen to make myself a fresh cup of tea. My money was mine. My life was mine. And finally, my respect was mine. 3 months is a funny amount of time. In the grand scheme of a life, it's a blink of an eye, but when you are rebuilding a relationship from the ground up, 3 months feels like a lifetime. I was standing on my balcony, holding a glass of Pinot Grigio. The humid Florida heat had finally broken, leaving behind a cool, pleasant evening. The Tampa skyline was twinkling in the distance, a cluster of white and gold lights reflected in the bay. From up here, the world looked organized. It looked peaceful. My doorbell rang. It was 6 p.m. on the dot. I walked to the door, feeling a sense of calm expectation. I wasn't bracing myself for an insult. I wasn't checking my bank account to make sure I could cover an emergency. I was just opening the door for my family. Russell and Stacy were standing there, but they looked different than they did 3 months ago. The panic was gone. The frantic need to impress was gone. Russell was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans. Stacy was holding a bottle of wine and a Tupperware container. "Hey, Mom," Russell said. He smiled, and for the first time in years, the smile reached his eyes. "Hi, honey," I said, stepping aside. "Come on in." They walked into my apartment. It felt fuller with them in it, but not crowded. "We brought dessert," Stacy said, holding up the container. "I made that lemon bar recipe you gave me. It's not as good as yours, but I tried. I'm sure it's delicious," I said. We sat down for dinner. I had made a simple pot roast. No catered food. No expensive cuts of steak to show off. Just comfort food. As we ate, Russell told me about their new place. They had sold the big house in the suburbs. It sold quickly, thank goodness, and they had just enough equity to clear the mortgage and put a deposit on a 2-bedroom townhouse closer to the city. "It's small," Russell admitted, cutting a piece of potato. "We had to sell a lot of the furniture. The giant dining table didn't fit, and we got rid of the guest bedroom set." He paused, looking at me. "But the mortgage is half of what we were paying. Stacy and I did the budget last night. We actually have money left over at the end of the month. Real money, not Dad's imaginary money." I nodded, feeling a swell of pride. "That is called freedom, Russell. It feels good, doesn't it?" "It does," he said. "It's weird not having the big lawn or the status address, but I sleep better. I haven't woken up in a panic since we moved." Stacy chimed in. "And Cheryl actually called us yesterday." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what did the new Mrs. Welker want?" "She wanted to know if we wanted to buy their patio furniture." Stacy laughed. "She said she's redecorating again. Can you believe it? She didn't ask how the move went. She just wanted to sell us her used chairs." Russell shook his head. "I told her no thanks. I told her we are saving up for a couch we can actually afford." We all laughed. It was a genuine, warm sound. The spell was broken. Russell no longer looked at his father and Cheryl as gods to be worshipped. He saw them as they were, people who were drowning in their own image, desperate for an audience. But the most important change wasn't about money. It was about how they looked at me. Throughout dinner, Russell asked me questions. He asked about my book club. He asked for my advice on which savings account they should open for their emergency fund. He listened when I spoke. He didn't interrupt me to talk about his father's vision. He didn't look at his phone. He looked at me with respect, not because I was writing a check, but because I had been right. You know, Mom, Russell said as we were clearing the plates, I was so angry at you when you cut us off. I thought you were trying to ruin me. I know, I said, stacking the dishes. But you didn't ruin me, he said softly. You saved me. If you hadn't stopped paying, I would have dragged Stacy down with me. We would have lost everything eventually. You forced us to grow up. He walked over and hugged me. It was a solid, strong hug. Thank you. You're welcome, I whispered. They stayed for another hour, eating the lemon bars, which were actually quite good, and talking about the future. When they finally left, the apartment didn't feel empty. It felt settled. I walked back out to the balcony and finished my wine. I looked out at the city lights again. For so long, I had defined myself by who I was supporting. I was Tom's wife. I was Russell's mother. I was the safety net. I was the silent partner. I had let them convince me that because I was quiet, I was small. I had let them convince me that because I wasn't flashy, I wasn't enough. But standing there in the cool night air, I knew the truth. I wasn't the background player. I was the foundation. And when the foundation moves, the whole house shakes. I had proven that I had the strength to hold them up and the strength to let them go. I took a final sip of wine, savoring the taste. I didn't need a big house. I didn't need a visionary husband, and I certainly didn't need to compete with a woman like Cheryl. I smiled at the skyline. I finally realized I didn't need to be half of anything. I am whole, all on my own. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.